Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this June 29, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Our opening story for tonight from Iraq. Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri Maliki has told the BBC that he hopes jets from Russia and Belarus will turn the tide against rebels in the coming days. He said that the process of buying U.S. jets had been long-winded and that the militants' advance could have been avoided if air cover had been in place. Speaking from Kurdish-ruled Erbil in northern Iraq, the BBC's Jim Muir said that Mr. Maliki was pinning his hopes on the Russian planes.
Some might think he was clutching at straws because not many people think this is a war that can be won from the air. It's more a ground thing and a question of hearts and minds. But he is apparently focusing very much on military hardware. There are reports that I can't confirm that he sent delegations to Iran, China and Russia looking for more arms to replace those that fell into the arms of the rebels when his army basically collapsed up in Mosul, leaving large amounts of hardware for the rebels to seize. So he's trying to make up for that, but whether that will compensate enough for the losses he's had and boost the manpower problem that he has or compensate for it, we'll have to wait and see. But so far there's been no sign that he's been able to mount what you could call a strategic counteroffensive to actually reverse the tide and push the rebels back. There have been topical engagements here and there, some won, some lost, ground changing, retaken and so on. But there's been no real concerted thrust to push the rebels back on their haunches.
And talking of external help, while you were talking there, Jim, we were seeing the pictures of the UK Foreign Secretary William Hague, who was meeting in Baghdad yesterday with the Iraqi Prime Minister. But also we're hearing about US President Barack Obama asking Congress for funding to train and arm moderate opposition fighters who are in Syria. But the idea is that they will help combat ISIS militants who are sort of trying to take ground on the border between Syria and Iraq. What do you make of that latest intervention?
It's been in the pipeline for quite a long time. The Obama administration has been promising to help the Syrian rebels more or to boost the moderates. They've been humming and hawing over this for 3 years, basically. But now the balance seems to have tilted. He's asking for substantial sums, 500 million, to support the Syrian opposition. And I think in their minds that this is supporting them at least as much against ISIS as against the Syrian regime. I mean, the battle lines here are changing. When you have a situation like bombing going on in western Iraq and it's not clear whether it's the Americans or the Syrian government doing it, you can see that things have changed. People are finding themselves on different sides of the battle lines than they used to be.
Iraqi Christians have been fleeing in their thousands from areas attacked by rebels led by ISIS or ISIL, the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. However, some are refusing to leave despite the threat of attacks. The BBC's Quentin Somerville reports from a mass in the town of Karakosh.
It was an ecstatic moment after a week from hell for Iraq's Christians. The leader of Catholics here came to bring comfort and to tell them it was safe to go home. As many as 40,000 Christians have fled in the past few days as ISIS drew closer. Kurdish forces returned fire 2 days ago as ISIS mortared the town of Karakosh. There was panic as Christians feared their town and their churches would be destroyed. But today we met those who refused to leave.
It was very troubling here, but we stayed in spite of all things. Yes.
Is it very hard to be a Christian in Iraq now?
It is, but this is our land. We will fight for this land and we will stay here. We are not leaving, actually.
This visit is sending a message that Karkush is back in Christian hands and it's safe for people to return. But ISIS hasn't gone away. They're just 5 kilometres from here, and neither has the threat to Christians in Iraq. Without peace, the future is bleak, says the Archbishop of Erbil.
We cannot convince them to stay.
And you can't ensure their safety?
No. We have nothing. We have nothing. We have only prayers, and if the decision is to divide the country to regions or to states, please do it, but peacefully, without this violence.
They celebrated Mass here today, as they have for hundreds of years. But with another war raging in Iraq, many wonder how much longer Christians can remain here. Quentin Somerville, BBC News in northern Iraq.
And friends, that last story relates to, I got a new chart, by the way. Actually, it's the same chart, but I've just pasted some of the things from the book of Revelation unveiled at last on both sides of it. But we can zoom in on just this portion of it. This story we just played in the video relates to 2 of these seals, actually. It relates to the first seal, the white horse, and to the red horse, rumors of war. And relates to the white horse in the sense that, friends, these people who are professing Christians in this story, and I believe very, very sincere people, but there is a problem in that they're looking to, the people they look to for mentoring or teaching, who have the influence over them, are people who ride the white horses that are depicted by the first seal of Revelation that Jesus Christ described in plain language by telling his disciples, and that means both those disciples that were with him while he was alive on this earth, that he spoke to in person in the human flesh, and all the rest of us who really are his disciples too, in one certain sense. When he said, related to that white horse, when he said, there will be many coming in my name saying that I am Christ, that Jesus Christ was the Christ, and yet deceiving the many. Well, in our next story, dear friends, we're still on the subject of Iraq. The Prime Minister of Iraq has confirmed to BBC News that Syria carried out airstrikes on ISIS or ISIL militants this week. Nouri al-Maliki said Syrian fighter jets had bombed militant positions around the border town of Qom on Tuesday. Unverified footage in this video, which was posted online, appears to show the aftermath of the strike. Mike Wooldridge reports.
The aftermath of a Syrian attack from the air on a building in the border area between Iraq and Syria, according to the commentary on this unverified footage. Now Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has confirmed there were such strikes, saying they were on the Syrian side of the border.
There was no coordination involved, but we welcome this action. We actually welcome any Syrian strike against ISIS, because this group targets both Iraq and Syria. They carry out their strikes and we carry out ours, and the final winners are our 2 sides.
And against the background of this development, Britain's Foreign Secretary William Hague visiting Baghdad, stressing the importance of political unity in Iraq and offering British diplomatic, counter-terrorism and humanitarian support. Batches of recruits have been turning up at this military camp north of Baghdad, declaring themselves ready for battle against ISIS. These from the tribe of Al-Rubai. Today we brought about 1,000 men, says the Al-Rubai chief Sheikh Mohammed Habib. We have more than 20,000 people willing to join the army, and some have already gone to the front. They're recruiting to and training down in the southern city of Basra. Not, they say, solely in defence of the Shiites, but in defence of all Iraqis, Shiite, Sunni and Christian. Arriving on foot as well as by car, these are among the latest Iraqis to flee their homes in the face of the Sunni insurgent attacks, Christian families seeking sanctuary in Kurdish-controlled territory. The checkpoint queues reveal the growing tide of displaced as the conflict continues with the new element of the Syrian involvement. The region's conflicts overlapping through ISIS and now in other ways too. Mike Wooldridge, BBC News.
Okay, thank you, Mike Woodridge. And friends, for our next report related to Iraq and Israel and the United States, Jordan may ask Israel to go to war against ISIL or ISIS. Now, I often say both terms, friends, because interestingly, and I've got to read this next report to you because I only have stills and not full video. But so many times I'll read one story where the news source is saying ISIS, ISIS, and then another news source will be saying ISIL. And of course, the United States government and the military refers to it as ISIL, and then other news agencies, most of the news agencies refer to it as ISIS. They just change the last letter, S or I. But the way it's being used in the news at the moment, it means the same thing. But I've got to read this one to you because there's no video or reporter with this one. It's short but significant, important piece of news. Jordan may ask Israel and the United States to help it fight the al-Qaeda-linked jihadist groups that threaten Syria and Iraq if it threatens Amman as well, according to senior Obama administration officials. According to a report Friday by news sources in Israel, the officials told senators in a classified briefing earlier this past week. I say this past week because, Sunday's really the first day of the week, so it's now a new week. But the classified briefing early last week, it was said that the Islamic State of Iraq, and the Levant, ISIL or ISIS, is eyeing Jordan as well as its war-torn neighbors, and that some of its jihadists have already tweeted out photos and messages saying they've seized a key Jordanian town. I'll just stay away from Petra. The news source that I'm using from Israel, friends, quoted one of the Senate staff members who attended the briefing as saying that according to the administration officials, if Jordan were to face a military onslaught from ISIL or ISIS, it would ask Israel and the United States for as much help as they can get. Israel and Jordan signed a peace treaty in 1994. Another senator said the main concern voiced during the briefing last week, was that Jordan could not repel a full assault from ISIL on its own at this point. On Thursday this past week, the United States met with the top Sunni state allies in the Mideast to consider how to confront the region's growing turmoil that has been spawned by a Sunni Muslim insurgency group. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said the threat posed by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant reaches beyond the two countries, Iraq and Syria, where it is currently based. The move of ISIL concerns every single country here, Kerry said at the start of the meeting held at the U.S. ambassador's residence in Paris. If Israel were to join regional efforts to fight ISIL or ISIS, it would effectively be joining forces with the likes of Iran and Syrian President Bashar Assad, whose forces have been fighting together in Syria and Iraq to overpower the jihadi group. This photograph, friends, allegedly shows Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant militants taking position at an Iraqi border post on the Syrian-Iraqi border on June 9, 2014, of course. However, according to an Israeli news source, Israel has indicated behind the scenes that it would be willing to give military assistance to its ally, Jordan, with which it signed, as I mentioned earlier in the report, it signed a peace treaty in 1994, Jordan and Israel. Quote, I think Israel and the United States would identify a substantial threat to Jordan as a threat to themselves and would offer all appropriate assets to the Jordanians, the media outlet quoted Thomas Sanderson, the co-director for transitional threats at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, as saying, in Washington, Jordanian embassy spokeswoman Dana Dode sounded more optimistic regarding her country's ability to face the jihad threat. We are in full control of our borders, and our Jordanian armed forces are being very Jordanian armed forces are being very vigilant. We have taken all the precautionary measures. So far, we have not detected any abnormal movement. However, if anything threatens our security or gets near our borders, our Jordanian borders, it will face the full strength of our Jordanian armed forces, Dode reportedly said. Meanwhile, Republican Adam Schiff, a Democrat who serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and is a co-chair of the Congressional Friends of Jordan caucus, told the Israeli news source I'm reading to you from that the Jordanian army was more than a match for ISIL. I don't think there is any sense that the rank and file Jordanian forces will melt away the way the Iraqis did, he said. Since its formation in April 2013 out of al-Qaeda in Iraq, ISIL has become one of the main forces fighting against Assad in Syria and gaining military control of parts of Iraq. Emboldened by these victories, the burgeoning jihadi group may set its sights on Jordan next. Mainstream Syrian rebels and the al-Qaeda-linked al-Nusra Front accuses the jihadist of ISIL of responsibility for a string of atrocities. On Friday, a watchdog and jihadist sites said it had executed and crucified one of its own men for occupation in Syria. Photographs posted on websites, I don't have one here for you, friends, but photographs posted on websites showed the body and bloodied head of a bearded man with a placard reading, "Guilty, Abu Adnam al-Anadali, sentence, execution, and 3 days of crucifixion. Motive, extorting money at checkpoints by accusing drivers of apostasy." For Israel, an ISIL assault on Jordan would mean it faces a jihadi threat on two fronts. On Friday, a senior Israeli military commander announced that almost the entire Syrian side of the Golan Heights is now under control of the rebel forces, including radical Islamist groups. The Israeli officer said that the dramatic gains made by the rebel forces in the area appeared to explain why Syrian troops fired a missile on Sunday earlier today that killed a 15-year-old boy on the Israeli side of the border, mistaking an Israeli civilian vehicle for a rebel truck. The Golan Heights is a strategic plateau on the Israeli-Syrian border. Israel captured the territory in the 1967 war, having been attacked from the Golan over the previous 20 years, and extended Israeli law to the area in 1981. Unsuccessful peace efforts over the years have seen Israel ready to trade most of the Golan for a permanent accord with Damascus, but the motion of Israeli-Syrian peace has all but disappeared as Syria collapsed into anarchy over the past 3 years of civil war. Friends, the material that I was just reading to you was came from Times of Israel staff, the Associated Press, and the AFP, which contributed to this report. There's some flooding in the news tonight, friends, overseas in Paraguay. Floods caused by torrential rains have forced the evacuation of tens of thousands of people in Paraguay.
People living in this shanty town in Paraguay's second largest city are already some of the poorest in the country. But intense rain has caused havoc, adding to their struggle. The floods have destroyed crops, homes and blocked roads. Even this football pitch has been totally submerged. But some in Ciudad del Este have decided to persevere, aware that they, like so many others, may also have to leave if the situation gets any worse.
Now, for example, the water has risen and it keeps on raining. It seems the rain is coming stronger. It will affect the rivers.
We moved out of our house to my niece's, but if the water continues to rise, we'll have to move again. We can't let our belongings get damaged.
And it's feared more rain will put more pressure on the country's rivers. Extensive flooding has already forced the evacuation of homes near the Paraguay and Parana rivers. The situation has forced 200,000 people from these areas. The government estimate that they have already spent more than $3 million helping to feed those worst affected. Makeshift camps have been set up on higher ground, but they are basic and stand little chance of weathering more heavy downpours, exposing families like these to further hardship in the coming days and weeks ahead. Alpa Patel, BBC News.
And friends, that story, of course, relates to the fourth seal, which Jesus Christ described to have three characteristics, primarily loimos, the primary main characteristic of this, of the activities of this horse, which is depicted as a pale horse with a rider named Death, alongside whom Hades, hell, the grave, rides. The primary characteristic of this horse and his rider is loimos, pestilence, disease epidemics, the plagues of Egypt. But Jesus Christ also said that before the Great Tribulation comes, this things represented by this seal would include seismic activity, commotions in the air and commotions on the ground. And he also mentioned in Mark 13, verse 8, that there would be terake, trouble, but not the mega trouble, not yet the mega trouble, but the beginning of sorrows, trouble that leads up to the great tribulation, the mega trouble, which is the next major event and prophecy to happen. But we've got more news related to that red seal at the moment that red horse of the second seal, being war, rumors of war, even civil war. Suspected Boko Haram militants have attacked several villages and churches in northeastern Nigeria. The BBC's Will Ross said the attacks happened in villages near a certain town that he'll tell us about here.
We understand the Boko Haram fighters arrived in these villages close to Chibok early this morning and spent hours and hours looting, setting fire to homes and shooting sporadically. They're talking about more than 40 people killed in these villages, most of those people civilians living in the villages and the vigilante groups that have sprung up to try and defend the people there, and then also some Boko Haram people killed. We're hearing reports of totally deserted villages now with only the elderly staying, and bodies on the streets of those villages. They're also talking a little bit about the military response. They say that a military aircraft was seen flying over the villages several hours after the Boko Haram fighters first struck. But the residents we have heard from are saying they haven't seen any Nigerian government soldiers at those villages to help the people. So they're crying out for help, really, because these attacks are incessant. Every week we're hearing reports of attacks close to Chibok, from where, of course, the more than 200 schoolgirls were taken almost 11 weeks ago.
Friends, the Nigerian militant Islamist group Boko Haram, that you were just hearing about in this report, has come to international prominence after abducting, as he mentioned there, more than 200 schoolgirls. But what do we know about the leader of the Boko Haram? The leader has inspired his group of fighters to kill hundreds of people in Nigeria, where Yalda Hakam spoke to people who knew this leader.
This is Abu Bakr Shekau, the leader of the feared Boko Haram militant group. Little is known about the man whose gunmen abducted 200 schoolgirls from the town of Chibok in the northeast of Nigeria. Filming openly in the region is dangerous, so the BBC has travelled covertly into the north of the country and has gained exclusive access to people who knew him well. Interviews have been done anonymously, as people are too scared of reprisals. This man was a member of what became Boko Haram. He knew Shekau personally.
He's a fanatic, not well versed in Islamic law. He takes hasty decisions and is very hard line on Islamic matters. And even his former mentor was careful around him because he was not open to any form of compromise.
Shekau spent his formative years here in Maiduguri, a major city in the northeast of Nigeria. Even by local standards, Shekau lived in abject poverty in this house in a slum quarter of the city. Shekau later enrolled himself at this formal Islamic school run by the government. One former classmate remembers him as a loner who kept himself apart from the other students.
We thought of him as psychologically affected. Just looking at him, you could tell that he was not completely with it.
But Shekau went on to lead Boko Haram 5 years ago, instigating a wave of terror through bombings and abductions. I headed north to meet another former colleague of Abu Bakr Shekau. He thinks the international outcry over the abductions of the 200 schoolgirls will have played well with the leader of Boko Haram.
He will have been pleased with all the media attention. He's happy with what they've done. He said that they will sell the girls on as slaves and has made it abundantly clear that they will abduct more girls.
These haunting pictures of the schoolgirls remain the last known images of them. Since the mass abduction in April, there have been further kidnappings of women and children in the same area, and Boko Haram have killed over 500 civilians. Yalda Hakim, BBC News, Abuja.
Friends, India is having a lot of problems right now. In this next report, Natalia Antalieva reports from Delhi about a gas pipe that exploded, killed at least 14 people, and did a lot of damage.
A massive fire after a state-owned gas pipeline exploded near the village of Nagaram. It happened at dawn. The blast was powerful. The fire it caused so ferocious that nearby villages had to be evacuated. It took 3 hours to get the flames under control. In a local hospital, doctors treated people that have been injured. 15 died in the explosion. In the afternoon, local men gathered in Nagaram, angry that it took so long for rescue teams to arrive. Everyone wanted to know why the explosion happened and what was being done to prevent another. So far, there aren't many answers. Authorities in Andhra Pradesh say they're investigating the blast. Natalia Antalieva, BBC News, Delhi.
Thank you. And friends, I have one more report came in related to India. Let's scoot ahead for it and play this one now. And then I got two very, very significant stories that we'll end with tonight. But first, another tragedy out of India.
Searching through the debris for any signs of survivors. This is what remains of an apartment block that came crashing down on Saturday evening. It was still being built, and those inside were construction labourers. Heavy rain was pounding the area when it happened. Many have lost their lives, but some were pulled out of the rubble alive. About 300 officers have been working round the clock to clear the area.
As you can see, it's a technical job. We have to cut through the rubble, remove the debris, and then identify the survivors. The first task is to rescue the trapped persons.
Scenes like these have almost become a common sight in India. And this is just the latest in what is already a long list of such incidents, putting the focus firmly on the need to have stricter regulations for the housing industry. Yogita Ramay, BBC News, Mumbai.
And friends, for our ending, two stories tonight. They relate to an event that triggered World War I. Thousands of people have gathered in Sarajevo to commemorate 100 years since the assassination of Austria's Archduke Franz Ferdinand, an event which triggered World War I, according to the history books. The president of Austria, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, and Macedonia attended a performance by the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. I've been to Vienna and I've seen that orchestra perform in Vienna, but they performed in the Bosnian capital. Aidan Nawaz reports.
Thousands of people have gathered in Sarajevo to commemorate 100 years since the assassination of Austria's Archduke Franz Ferdinand, an event which triggered World War I. The presidents of Austria, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro and Macedonia attended a performance by the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra in the Bosnian capital. It was also watched on big screens by members of the public.
Okay, I should have just let him name all those countries that he did mention. He did a much better job of pronouncing them than I did. I apologize for that. Bosnia is commemorating. I've got one more video, though. This is give you just a little more on the history of how round one of World War was triggered off. And this next video will show a little bit of the same thing. Bosnia is commemorating 100 years of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, the act that triggered World War I. Alan Little has returned to Sarajevo, where the shooting took place, and looks at how the assassins is remembered a century on.
He pulled a gun, broke through the crowd, he shot him and his pregnant wife, Sofia, dead.
It is a routine stop on the tourist trail now, the street corner where the assassin struck, killed the heir to the Austrian throne and propelled the world into the bloodiest century in human history. But history is a powerful living thing here. It is a divisive force. Bosnians cannot agree what to make of Gavrilo Princip, the young Serb who pulled the trigger that day. In the Serb suburb of East Sarajevo, they're building a new park to celebrate Princip. Serbs still feel the world blames them for starting the First World War. Here, Princip is no assassin, but a liberation champion.
Most of our people, most of our nation, Serb nation, see him as a hero, see him as a fighter for liberation of our nation. On his act on 28th of June in 1914, we started the process of liberation of whole people, and we said no to the occupation, to the annexion, to the aggression.
But in non-Serb Bosnia, the memories of a more recent war are too raw. Serb forces besieged Sarajevo for 1,000 days in the early 1990s. It carries the scars still. They see Princip differently here. The shrine where Princip's remains are buried tells its own story of the way history shifts and warps over time.
After the First World War, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia turned the atheist revolutionary into an Orthodox Christian martyr. And after the Second World War, communist Yugoslavia turned the Serb nationalist Princip into a pan-Yugoslav patriot.
Each generation projects onto Princip what it wants to see. After the war of the early 90s, Sarajevo saw him as the forerunner of the Serb forces who had shelled their city.
There was a kind of medal given to Serb army members that was called after Gavrilo Princip, and those are the guys who bombed Sarajevo in the 1990s, so probably ordinary citizens of Sarajevo would probably have a different opinion on his name and act.
History divides this country. The young here inherit contradictory versions of their past, parallel truths about the young revolutionary whose fateful shots echo down the decades. Alan Little, BBC News, Sarajevo.
Friends, some have asked me, Stephen, why do you often save some of the very best stuff to the very end of your program? Well, that's to reward those of you who stay with me to the end of each night's program. I often put some of the best stuff, or sometimes I close with something light, as you know. But that's it for tonight, friends, for this Sunday night report. God willing, and the creek don't rise. Oh, wait, there's something just coming in over here I want to tell you about. At the very present moment, Iraqi government troops are attempting to retake the city of Tikrit from Sunni militants after the Sunni militants swept through large parts of northern Iraq on June 11. According to BBC's Paul Adams, we don't have video yet, but Paul Adams said a U.S. Special Forces team is now on the ground helping coordinate activities. So we'll be watching that. Very likely have more news on Iraq tomorrow night. But again, friends, that's it for tonight's report, this Sunday night report. God willing, the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow evening, Monday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy right here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd, saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.